Today we're back with another episode of Battlefield 1 history, and we're going to take a look at the German standard issue rifle of the First World War, the Gewehr 98 Mauser. The main designer of the weapon, Paul Mauser, developed weapons for the German government and various other nations as well, not to mention that he was one of the most prolific gun designers in history, only superseded by the legendary John Browning. Beginning service in 1898, the Gewehr 98 was actually a newer and improved model based on the already existing Gewehr 88, with the weapon being quickly developed in response to France's new Lebel 1886, which at the time stood as the most advanced bolt-action rifle in the world. With the main advancements of the Lebel using smokeless powder ammunition, the Germans answered their rivals with their own version of smokeless powder ammunition. The Gewehr 98 successfully overcame the Lebel as the bolt-action rifle. If anything, the Gewehr was one of the most popular bolt-action rifles at the time. It was copied, and other nations' bolt-action rifles took a lot of inspiration and design from the Mauser, the main one being the M1903 Springfield. In fact, the weapons were so close to each other in terms of design that Mauser sued the United States government and ended up paying royalty to every weapon produced until the US entered the war in 1917. Now, the main reason why the Gewehr was so popular and why it worked so well was actually the bolt itself. A new, larger, and stronger receiver design became the U-shaped shroud that held the controlled bolt group, having 3 locking lugs. The 2 main lugs were fitted to the bolt head, while the third lug was used for safety at the rear of the bolt. It was a redundant lug, so to speak, if any of the first 2 lugs had failed, which was extremely unlikely, but if it did happen, you could fall back on the third lug. And the bolt handle was completely straight with a round knob at the end, which attached directly and permanently to the bolt. Carbine variants of the Mauser had a bent bolt handle that you would expect to see on more traditional bolt-action rifles at the time, like the SMLE. The Gewehr 98 greatly reflected late 19th century military thinking. The weapon was generally pretty long compared to future weapons like the Kar 98, with a length of 4 feet and 14 inches or 1.57 meters. The Mauser held a fairly large rear sight that zeroed from 400 to 2,000 meters. Its appearance had this kind of slope to it and was often nicknamed the roller coaster sight. Now, before World War I, the Germans thought that the engagement ranges would be very long, so 400 meters would be fine. Now, as the war began and everybody started digging their trenches, it became apparent that engagements were much closer than 400 meters. So the soldiers would aim at their enemies at center mass, but thanks to the zeroing, the bullet flew well over their head. To combat this, the Germans tried to change the rear sight, but eventually gave up. Soldiers in the trenches eventually grew accustomed to aiming downward to compensate for the wonky zeroing on the weapon. The Mauser held a 5-round internal magazine fed via stripper clip, using the new 8.20 Spitzer cartridge. This new bullet was pointed, making it different from the more round-nosed bullets that you see in earlier weapons. There were a number of reasons as to why they made this change. It had better aerodynamics for one, it was lighter, and was much cleaner. Overall, in the mud and harsh conditions of trench warfare, the Gewehr 98 was remarkably reliable, sturdy, and worked well no matter what you threw at it. The Mauser also saw use in the beginning of World War II as well, before being phased out to a more modernized carbine version called the Carabiner, which grew into the famous Kar 98K. But that's going to wrap up today's video. If you want to see a weapon featured in the next episode of Battlefield 1 history, let me know by leaving a comment down below. And as always, it's been BloodHound, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.